Good morning, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're continuing our fireside chats here in Jayla Bhavan. And it is about April something, 7, 8, 6, 7, something there in 2020. And we're continuing on with sheltering in place. I was reflecting this morning, trying to think what would be an interesting and appropriate topic, and what occurred to me was one of the teachings that I received from Swamiji about the 8 manifestations of God. And it's a very fascinating and far more, it's a much bigger topic than I can possibly cover in 30 minutes, but I really thought I would review it a little bit and give us some point of view, because in our extremely constricted circumstances, so many of us, we're trying to figure out how to still have the same dynamic spiritual life, or even a more dynamic spiritual life than we've been able to have before. But if you're like me, you know the opportunities have completely shifted. I'm fortunate that I can still do what is my essential Dharma, which is to be able to share with you Swami's teachings by this wonderful method of the internet. So let me talk about what I'm going to talk about. You know, we often say in the spiritual path that we're trying to be instruments of God, we're trying to be channels of God, we're trying not to act from our own ego, we're trying to act from divine inspiration. Swamiji talks about when he was first starting out teaching for Master, and he was a minister giving a sermon in the Hollywood church, or one of the churches of SRF, when he was 22, 23 years old. And he had been told by Master that God is the doer, and God is the one who is acting through us. And Swamiji, who was always, he never hesitated to sort of do the proper experiment to find out what the truth was. So he was giving a sermon in the church there, and it occurred to him that if God was the doer, he would just let God speak through him. And so he went into silence. And he stood there, you know, on the platform in front of about 100 people, and he just stood silently waiting for God to speak. And he said he was perfectly calm, and he said he stood there for about 2 minutes of silence, which is actually a very, very long time when the person is in the middle of a speech. If I stop, even for that many seconds, you can't help but think, what's happened to her? Has she lost her mind? Has she frozen? You know, what's taken place? So Swami said he stood for 2 minutes, and the other monks who were his friends had thought he'd sort of frozen and panicked in some way and didn't know what was going on. But Swami said he was perfectly calm. He was doing an experiment. He just wanted to see what the result would be. And then he realized that whatever it meant for God to be the doer, it obviously involved him in a more dynamic way than just simply standing there and letting it happen. Now, that was a very important experiment, because all of us, we get very confused by that idea. And we sometimes think that to be a channel of God means we have to be standing from the mountaintop and declaiming, or what do we mean? Now, the way this, for me in my own life, has become exceedingly practical and exceedingly accessible, because the hard thing about being a channel for God is that it feels rather inaccessible. Even though we have these ideas that God is within me and so on, there's a lot inside of me, and not all of it would I consider to be Divine Mother's first choice. You know, so there's always this discernment among the many different impulses I have as to which one is God inspired, because our own inner consciousness ranges from deep subconscious all the way to superconscious. And so the stages, which is a slightly different subject, but not that diverse from it, of knowing and following your inner guidance, is first we have to become aware of our inner reality, because there are people in the world who simply live externally, just letting everything be dictated from outside themselves. So the first step of inner guidance is to become aware of one's own unique karmic inclinations, and then one needs to discern among those karmic inclinations which one will keep me on the treadmill of being exactly who I have always been, and which ones will lift me superconsciously toward greater awareness. So that's why when we're trying to be a channel of God, we need to have some kind of a template that we can lay across it. Well, Sanat Dharma, good old Sanat Dharma, is always coming through with something so clear and so wonderful, and that is the 8 manifestations of God. I'm not enough of a scholar to tell you sort of where this teaching came from or exactly what it means. I mean, exactly why these 8 qualities and so on, but I accept it as Master's teaching and the way Swami has expressed it. So the 8 manifestations of God are qualities of consciousness. It's love, joy, peace, calmness, and peace and calmness are distinct from each other, energy, which is often called power, light, and sound, and the one that I can't remember. Love, peace, joy, calmness, energy, light, sound. Isn't that funny? I can only remember 7. Love. No, I said love. Huh. What did I forget? Love, joy, peace, calmness, energy, light, wisdom. Thank you. Wisdom. Of course, wisdom. I should have been smart enough to know that, but I didn't. Okay. So here's what this does for us, and I'll talk a little bit about what each of these qualities are in a moment. These are qualities of consciousness and attitudes of mind. They are not specific actions. It's not saying to do Kriya. It's not Kriya. It's not chanting. It's not energization exercises. It's not any specific technique of meditation or systems of belief or line of teachings or anything like that. They are vibrations of consciousness that are something that we can choose to express. And we can choose to express that vibration of consciousness when we're up in the middle of the night taking care of a baby, when we're sitting in a board meeting trying to decide some bazillion-dollar deal, when we're in the middle of an argument with someone who's giving us a very hard time, when we're on a battlefield, when we're sick in a hospital bed. You know, all of these qualities of consciousness, because they are inherent to the divine, and because this is the way the divine expresses itself in the world, they're always part of our own nature. There is no circumstance there's no circumstance, I was going to say, in heaven or earth or any other sphere of existence in which these vibratory qualities are not also present and acting. So what they do, and the way I've used them, and I've used them, I want to say it's one of my favorite, I believe it's one of my favorite, and it's certainly one of my most useful understandings of the spiritual path, because it always gives me, not only does it always give me something, a theoretical way to understand how to behave, but it also always gives me an accessible way to behave. Because the 8 choices that you have, and there are indeed 8 of them, choices that you have, they represent, in every circumstance, one or another is going to be appropriate. In every circumstance, one or another will be accessible. Let's sort of work with this for a minute. You know, let me get a context here for a second on it. Well, right at the moment, here we are sequestered in place. And I can't always be calm about what's happening, and I don't always feel peaceful. And I've often felt joyful, but I don't always feel joyful. So maybe calm, peace, and joy are not accessible to me. But one thing that is accessible is energy, So one of the things that I've done to help solve this is I've found a place to put my energy, which is because I know how to sew. I've been sewing these homemade cotton masks to try to get our whole community protected. Now we're trying to reach out into the neighborhood. It's unlikely that we're going to be able to just keep going and going, but of course there's hospitals and nurses and so many people who need things. So I have other responsibilities that I'm working on, but if I'm finding that my joy is slipping, or that I'm feeling a little nervous and my peace is slipping, oh, well, there's something I could do. I could put out energy. And because I have the mask making just right here in my home job and church in one place like everyone else does, I can just go downstairs and sew a few of these masks. And the very act of putting out energy that's serviceful and helpful to others, just by the doing of that, it puts me more in tune. And I feel more able, to then be a little more peaceful, be a little kinder. When I was, again, just sort of feeling, I'm just giving you specific examples from the last few days, sort of how things have been feeling. When I feel a little perhaps lonely or a little bereft, I remembered a few old friends that I haven't been in touch with for a long time. So one can reach out. These days, we're all having these Skype calls, with people that, sometimes people we haven't talked to in a long time, because everybody suddenly has time to talk. Or I've written several letters of deep appreciation for what people have, who people have been to me over the course of my life, renewing old friendships or strengthening friendships that may have been a little bit neglected. In other words, expressing some love. And then when you start expressing love, then a joyful feeling comes into the heart. Now, and then of course there's always sound. And sound on our particular path can be either mantra or affirmation or chanting. And I make it a habit of listening to Swami Kriyananda's voice. At least I try at least every day, and often many times a day, because the sound of his voice has a vibration in it, really, of all 8 manifestations of God. And just listening to the sound of his voice, I've mentioned to some of you that I find myself sometimes re-listening to, I have my computer on autoplay, and sometimes I find myself re-listening to a talk. I don't know how it happened, but I realized I was listening to one of his talks for the 3rd time. But it was, as I was listening to him tell me the same story, which of course, in the course of 45 years, I heard a lot of Swami's stories, but I mean really literally listening to the same recording of the same story, it began to sound to me like one of his songs. And I was thinking how many, many, many times I've heard Swamiji's songs, heard him sing them or sung them myself or heard others, and I always find it fresh, ever new in the moment. And I realized just hearing him tell that same story, there was something in the vibration of his voice. And the vibration of his voice was a manifestation of calmness, among other things. And so just by listening to his voice, almost without the intellectual content, because I knew what it was, that there was no new revelation in what he was saying, at least not that time. But the calmness in his voice began to communicate to me the feeling of calmness that was lacking. It was a manifestation that wasn't available to me. Calmness and peace, being 2 of the 8 manifestations, are very interesting. Peace is when there is an absence of conflict. And that can be an absence of inner conflict, where one feels simply at peace with oneself. So much of the time, I was speaking using Mickey Singer's image of the roommate, the inner roommate who's always talking inside your head. In his book, The Surrender Experiment, or The Soul's Journey, which is not the right name for his book, his first book, he talked about the fact that someone in our head is always talking, which we think of as ourself, but in fact, someone else is also listening, and the listener is really ourself, And the one who's talking all the time is our not self. I spoke of it, and I won't go into it in more detail. You can read his books. But peace is when that inner voice inside our head is no longer tormenting us. That somehow, we live so much of the time with so many different strands of ourself pulling against each other. And peace is when, for some reason, those conflicting self-definitions and self-impulses have come together in harmony for a long or a short moment. That's what happens to us in meditation. We often feel this deep peace because we've shifted our consciousness away from that endless alternating point of view, which is our own thoughts. And we discover that behind all that up and down movement, there's this very deep sense of divine peace. That's what our Kriyas help us access, because the breath and the thoughts are so closely related. When we get the breath moving with deliberate, deep concentration, then often the thoughts are stilled, and when the thoughts are stilled, we discover that there's this omnipresent peace. Jesus called it the peace that passeth all understanding, which is behind all of the restlessness. Now, calmness, and peace also can be external. Peace can be that finally you've got the children to bed and the house is quiet and there's just nothing going on here. I was reading this one of these many humorous things that's going around, and parents are having to homeschool or virtually homeschool their children. This is just a series of funny things, just funny one-liners. Today, one of the children called in a bomb threat, it said. Today, 2 of the children were suspended for fighting, and the teacher was suspended for drinking on the job. Another one said, today my child said, I hope I don't have the same teacher next year. It's just like everybody's finding tremendous humor in what's going on today. Well, in any case, there is a peace that happens when finally nothing is happening, when things are just really quiet and there's no conflict. And that peace either comes just because the world has calmed down, or it comes spontaneously because we escape from our thoughts. But sometimes peace is simply not possible. We're in the middle of a fight. We're in the middle of a war. We do have all the children at home, and one of them has called in a bomb threat. There's just nothing that can be done. Calmness is being able to hold our center in the midst of all of this. You can be extremely calm on the playing field, the soccer field, in the middle of the game. Many high-level sports athletes talk about the zone, is what they call it, where there's just no reality at all except what they're doing and where they're going, even though there are people screaming and 10,000 fans and other players trying to stop them. And that's this very deep state of calmness, which is more than just concentration. Many times on the battlefield, literally, a hero, someone who turns out to have done something heroic, afterwards will speak of just literally guns were going off all around him, people were dying all around him, and yet there was this deep sense of inner calm, even as he himself moved, at what appeared to be a frenzied pace across the battlefield to achieve whatever objective was necessary. So calmness is also this tremendously powerful potential when we absolutely cannot control circumstances. We can use calmness often in keeping also with sound, which is to inwardly do japa, which is to repeat the name of God, or repeat a mantra in some way. Repeat japa means repeating the name of God, which usually means a mantra that we have. Om Guru, Divine Mother, bless us all. I am one with the Infinite Spirit. Power of Spirit flow through me. Whatever it might be, that we are constantly accessing that inner state of calmness, even as we might move more rapidly than we've ever moved before. Now, wisdom, of course, is, at least for me, I find wisdom very useful, and in the way I share, you can understand how my mind works. And I'm not talking about gyan, I'm not talking about sort of repudiating the reality of this world, which is the essence of gyan, where you follow the practice, not this, not this, not this, where we just keep eliminating the unreal until we come to the real. Wisdom is not intellectuality. Wisdom is knowing what the truth is, and then calmly, simply holding to it. Remembering the law of karma. I am not really a victim. Remembering Divine Mother's presence, that we are all in God's hands, and everything that is happening for our ultimate realization. I've certainly found it extremely helpful, which is the nature of these broadcasts and of everything that you hear from me. What I'm trying to get very clear and very simple what the principles of Sanat and Dharma are, so that I can find my way back from the confusion, the emotional and the mental confusion, even and precisely the 8 manifestations of God, to understand that I have these 8 tools, and one of them is always going to be both appropriate and acceptable for the situation. And that's why I study, that's why I listen to Swamiji, that's why I constantly try to find a way to explain these things. I'm explaining them to myself and explaining them to you. Let me act according to the highest truth that I know. And let me keep that truth foremost always in my awareness, so that when I'm not feeling calm, and when the situation is not peaceful, I can remember a principle, and that principle will help bring me back. Joy is also, what someone asked me once, and I thought it was a really fun question, I'd never considered it. They said, of the 8 manifestations of God, which are your favorites? And I'd never thought of having favorites. But it was sort of a question also, what are you inclined toward? And what I'm inclined toward is joy. And so when I thought about it, I said my 2 favorites are joy and wisdom. I really love the teachings. I love the teachings. I'm so profoundly inspired by how brilliant these teachings are, and I love the way Swami expresses it, and I love the way he reduces everything down to its simplest essence, and it's like you're standing on the mountaintop and this Himalayan mountain of wisdom has risen up, and there you can stand right on Swami's words. Like I know I was part of these broadcasts, I quoted him, change is the only certainty in life. Most people resist change. That's why most people are unhappy. Oh yeah, there you have it. That's just it, isn't it? And then when I find myself unhappy and I realize that change has come and I don't like that change and therefore I get to be unhappy, is that wisdom? No, I don't think so. And I might genuinely be very, very sad about what's happening, so my second favorite, joy, is not an option. But wisdom can bring me back, perhaps to calmness, and calmness can bring me back to sound. Sound can be prayer, or sound can be remembering, if I just can get Swami's voice or Swami's music into my awareness, then all of a sudden I'm going to feel happier again. And as soon as I feel happier again, everything looks different, doesn't it? And then I remember that I love my life. And I love the person who just interrupted my peace and took away my joy and forced me to have to go seeking kindness, wisdom, and then listening to Swami's music so I'll have the right sound. And then I feel lighter. And light, is very interesting because light, of course, is the phenomenon of light, the inner phenomenon of light. But light also has that sort of a double meaning, which is it's not heavy. And so the heaviness that comes, remembering the presence of light, remembering the images of light, remembering the sunrise, remembering the sunset, remembering the startling beauty of light. When I was with a dear friend named Tushti, who died of cancer, And I was with her for about 3 weeks, and then she died a week or so after I separated from her. And we were at a friend's house, and several of us living together, her husband and several others, we were together. I wrote up all of that. If you go to Asha Joy website, there's letters, and I wrote up that experience, it was a really beautiful experience. But most of the time, when she started really transitioning into an alternate universe, and I never really could go with her. I could go with her in feeling, in very deep meditation sometimes. But one time we were sitting together. This was when she was still earlier on, when she was still communicating, more connected to this world. But we were both just sitting and we were staring out the window, and there was a beautiful sky. We had a view of a beautiful sky. And we just started talking. And she started telling me about the colors, the magenta, the green, the turquoise, just in a voice like that. And I couldn't see any of those colors, none of them at all. But I didn't tell her that. I just I agreed with her about how beautiful the colors were, because somehow through her mind I could see them. And that experience, a shared experience that was not even exactly mine, but it helped me remember what light is. That light, this vision of color and light, it's intoxicatingly beautiful. All of us in our lives have had experiences like that, where the vision of light, be it simply a sunset or a gemstone or a piece of fabric or a flower, this color and light in itself, you see, what does it awaken? It awakens love. It awakens joy. It reminds us of the presence of God. And you see how this can be like a prescription. It's like this is my medicine chest. This is my spiritual medicine chest. I would also say that I've spoken much more. I believe there's at least one talk on the website about this subject, but because I see that we're running out of time. But given as we are in these sheltering days, where our options are so limited, we are forced more than ever, and this is all to the good, to solve the problems of consciousness on the level of consciousness. Stephen Levine, who was a man who helped pioneer the hospice movement, he talked about when a person is on their deathbed and they haven't much time left and they begin to lose the capacity to use their body at all. And they can't get out of bed, they can't do anything. He said often they become very agitated because they are used to solving the problems of consciousness through physical action. And when physical action is not possible, they are forced to solve the problems of consciousness entirely on the level of consciousness. He said often there's a period of great agitation and then almost always a surrender. And with that surrender comes this deep peace and the realization that it was always a question of consciousness. And if I adjust my consciousness, then everything will follow. So here we are with so many physical options taken away from us. It gives us, we are in the gymnasium of consciousness. And these 8 manifestations are the routine that God is asking us to follow, so that when this time is finished, we will emerge not weaker, but infinitely stronger than when this began. God bless you.